All right, good morning, everybody, and welcome back once again for another coaching stream. I am your host, Matt Hunt, as always. Thank you for being here. I appreciate everybody for joining in with the stream. As always, we're going to be going through some concepts today that relate to the challenges that we've been doing on Discord. So if you're not familiar, if you're not taking part in those challenges, do jump into our Discord and get involved with those. You can find the link to the Discord on the main Octopi homepage. I believe it is at the bottom right here. You can click on this little Discord icon down here. And today we're going to be going through a concept that relates directly to the drills and the challenges that we've been doing recently, which is blind versus blind. So we've been focused for the last month or so on making sure that we're studying these blind versus blind situations, simply because blind versus blind is such a common and such an important part of tournament strategy as a whole. Now, I would love for you guys to drop in the chat what it is you perhaps find most difficult about blind versus blind, because it is a really good, or it is a really tricky area to study. There's a lot of mixed strategies. There's a lot of randomizing, a lot of frequency stuff going on. Stack sizes are going to affect things. So do let me know in the chat what the challenges are for you, perhaps, and we can make sure we address those a bit more directly. But what I want to do, first of all, as opposed to just jumping into some drills right away, is I want to talk a little bit about some of the pre-flop fundamentals and how stack sizes are going to influence this whole dynamic here, because stack sizes are really important for this. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into our sim finder. So you guys should be able to see all of this coming through normally here. If there's any issues on the audio or the video front, just let me know here, but I think we should be good. So we're going to go into finding some sims, and we're going to specifically look for some sims that are perhaps just a basic chip EV setup to begin with. And we're not going to worry about the even stack sims. We're actually going to focus on specifically some uneven stack sims, and we're going to find a situation where blind on blind is perhaps on the deeper stacked side here, right? So we're going to worry about everything that's, let's say, small blind is going to have perhaps more than 50 bigs, and big blind is also going to have more than 50 bigs. That's probably a good starting point. So we're going to use these filters. And as you can see, we've got a few sims in here that are pretty good examples. The first one that I'm going to use is this one. This is with the big blind having 76 bigs and the small blind having 123. Now, the deep stack sims that we're going to see here are going to serve as a pretty good guideline for how the majority of very deep stack sizes are going to play out as far as blind on blind goes, because as you get deeper and deeper and deeper, everything's going to stay pretty consistent. So you will find that, 70, 80 bigs plus, everything is going to look very, very similar. We're also going to compare this second sim that we have here. So we're going to highlight both of these sims, and we're going to look at them for a comparison, because this second one has about 53 big blinds effective. And then what I'm going to do is slightly decrease this stack size. We're going to go down to maybe something a bit more in the kind of medium stack region. So between 30 and 45 bigs, something in that area. We've got, okay, this one's pretty good. So we've got 87 and 42 right there. And then I'm going to also give something in the 25-ish kind of big blind region. Let's go something like that. Let's just find something where the effective stack is a bit shallower. 24 bigs there, 29 over here. Yeah, I think 24 is fine. Let's go with 24. So we've got four sims selected at the moment. We're going to hit compare. And as you can see, it's going to bring up all four of these sims. Now, what I'm going to do, first of all, is I'm just going to minimize these situations down here so we can focus on the top one. And I want to specifically just kind of move around to this small blind node here where we've got small blind versus big blind. Now, as you can see, as far as the small blind strategy goes, the first thing that we want to note about this is that there isn't really a lot of raising. So Nancy says, would love some tips about bet sizing at different depths and what purpose the sizing serve. Okay, great. Yeah. So can you clarify for me, are we talking about raise sizes pre-flop, or are we talking about post-flop bet sizes here, because those are obviously a couple of different things, but I'll be happy to go through any of those topics there. So as far as the small blind goes, raising first in, you can see that there's a heavy bias towards limping at these deeper stacks. And that is going to change a bit as we get shallower. So this is the first thing that I want to kind of focus on a little bit. The deep stacks are favoring limping because eventually our disadvantage from being in the small blind here starts to kind of get maxed out. The big blind's positional advantage gets maxed out. And it starts to get to a point where we're deep enough that they can't really, hammer us too much one way or the other, or they can't really, exploit their position that much one way or the other. So we get more and more opportunity to limp as stacks get deeper. But as we get shallower, what you'll see is that there starts to be a bit more of a shift towards a little bit more raising. So as you can see here, the second sim, we've got about 53 big blinds effective. And in this case, we've got the same raise size. We've got a 4 big blind raise size, but we've got a lot more raising. We've got 18% raising now. Now, there's still quite a lot of limping, but the raising is starting to come in more consistently. And if you look at the types of hands that are favoring raising, it's obviously a very mixed bag. So there is a certain amount of randomizing RNG work needed in a lot of these situations. But the general idea here is a lot of these strongest suited hands are strong enough that they just like to raise. They can get action from worse. They can defend against a 3-bet. They can realize equity really well post-flop. There's just all sorts of benefits there to a lot of those strong hands wanting to raise at a high frequency. And then we're obviously supplementing that with some pretty weak suited hands and a mix of a variety of offsuit hands. But there's no huge trend here that we can really easily identify as far as what's telling us which hands to raise and which hands to limp. It's just a question of generally shifting more towards a raise here. Now, if I actually look at the next stack size down, which in this case was about 40 big blinds, now you can see there's a lot more raising even further, right? We've got up to 26% raising. And in fact, a lot of those very strong hands now are heavily favoring raising. A lot of our strongest hands, post-flop. Okay, thanks, Nancy. I'll talk about that in just a second for sure. We'll go through some aggregate reports. This shift here towards towards raising again even more frequently, it's kind of happening because as we get towards this medium stack size, the ability to raise and put the big blind under some pressure starts to count for a lot because it really influences the post-flop SPR. If we're really deep stacked, then, when we raise, they're still just going to call at a super high frequency anyway. And, we're not really going to get that many folds. But here at this depth, the ability to, get some folds is increased because they're not getting, they're not quite such, not in quite such an easy position to just flat and just play post and so on, right? So it starts to become more viable for us to raise as we get down to this kind of medium stack region. And then if we go, oops, that's not what I wanted. This is what I wanted. If we go down to this sort of shallow-ish stack size here of 22 big blinds, or 24, I think was the starting stack here, you can now see that we actually have shoves coming in. It's a lot of low pocket pairs, and it's a lot of offsuit ace hands. We still have that kind of fairly polarized raising range here, but it's a bit more in the region of hands that are very, very inclined to just easily fold if we get shoved on, or hands that are easily going to just snap it off, right? We've got a lot of these strongest hands, so it's pretty polar in that sense. So there are some trends there in terms of how we're constructing that first in strategy in the small blind right there. So that's a little bit of an overall guide to the small blind pre-flop. But let's take a quick look at the big blind in all of these situations. First of all, after the small blind limps, and then also after the small blind raises. This is the deeper stack scenario here, about 75 deep. So small blind limps, big blind. As you can see in both of these scenarios, when we're relatively deep, there is a pretty distinct division between the value portion of the raising range and the bluffs. except the value portion is really wide, right? We've got all of this top sort of 25% or so of the deck is actually basically value. And then there's a bunch of really trashy bluffs. And a lot of the medium suited hands, weakish suited hands, and then the medium offsuit hands are preferring to check back. And the same thing is happening here at this 53 big blinds effective. So pretty consistent there as far as these strategies go. If we go from 53 down to this region of about 40-ish, we can still see the same sort of thing happening, except there's a region now of these suited aces that's a bit happier to check back. These middle suited hands are a bit happier to check back, simply because they don't really like the possibility that they could get check shoved on, or it becomes more problematic to face a check shove at this particular stack size. So this starts to happen as we get shallower. And then if we get down to this 20-ish big blind or 24 big blind region, you can start to see that happening even more. It's a very clear, polarized, small raise here of 2.8, where you've got a lot of trashy offsuit stuff, and then a bunch of pretty strong stuff that's just going to call a shove. And then there's also a shoving range, which is actually pretty much a mirror image of the small blinds shoving range first in, low pocket pairs and offsuit aces. So that's very much a consistent trend there as well. And finally, if we go through the big blinds response against a raise here, you'll see there's a lot of consistency here as well. If we go with these two deeper stack scenarios, let's go here. The 4 big blind open is producing almost identical strats here, right? You've got a little bit of some suited connectors coming in at the deeper stack size, because there's a need for a bit more board coverage there. But basically, it's a very polar 3-bet strategy. And it's also a very small 3-bet size of just over 2.5x. So it's just really looking to make the small blind kind of fold their bluffs and not really, 3-betting to a big size, because the small blind doesn't have that many hands in their range that would have a tough decision against a big size. So we need to use a small size in order to kind of put them in that tough spot here. If we look at how it changes when we get shallower at 40, once again, we're going to see some consistency. Very polar raise strategy at this point. There's also some shoves coming in, but really we're looking at some very trashy offsuit stuff, and then a lot of very strong stuff that's just looking to stack off. And finally, as we get shallower, if we see the 2.8 raise, now we're only doing a very small amount of non-all-in 3-betting, because there's not a lot of room for it at this stack size. And for the most part, we're shoving those low pairs and offsuit aces again. The only other weird thing here is that pairs like 10s through 5s are actually flatting here. And I think players are pretty inclined to just shove with those. But in fact, what it comes down to is if you look at the opening range, there's not a ton of those low pocket pairs in that opening range. So hands like 10s, 9s, 8s, 7s, 6s, 5s, and so on, they can't really get called by worse that often if they shove, because they ultimately just get called by a lot of hands that are kind of flipping against them. And then they fold out a lot of stuff that they're absolutely crushing. If we have 10s and we 3-bet, or if we have 9s and we 3-bet, we fold out like 9-3 suited, but we don't want that. We want villain to try to be forced to play post-flop with 9-3 suited against pocket 9s. So a couple of interesting dynamics there. But let's now move over into looking at post-flop. So Nancy, this one is going to be hopefully helpful for you. We're going to go into the even stacked viewer here, because we need to figure out the specific scenarios. We need to use the ones that we have in the database. So I'm going to start with 60 big blinds, because I think these are 60, 30, and 15 are always good stack sizes to look at here as far as post-flop, just because that tends to be a nice threshold of where some of the strategies change a little bit. So we're going to go 60 bigs, and we're going to look at, first of all, some of these limped pots. We're going to go limp check, and we're going to look at the aggregate reports. So you will see some sizes here that are pretty traditional. We've got B33 here, which is the 1 big blind into 3, and we've got B75. So we've got a smaller bet and a bigger bet. Now what you'll notice in limped pots is that it's very tricky for either player to have a huge range advantage in a specific situation, because the small blind is not limping an excessively strong range. The big blind is not checking back an excessively strong range. So no one is going to have like a massive range advantage. And the SPR here is still pretty high. SPR is still about 20 here almost, right? So that kind of means that small blind doesn't really get to play particularly aggressively post-flop. And as you can see, that results in a strategy like this where you've got some amount of B33, some board textures where, because the big blind isn't really checking back a lot of strong ace X or anything like that, these board textures that are paired to the ace and things of that nature do allow the small blind to do a little bit more betting. Same goes for some of these two-tone textures. Even the monotone here, there's a certain amount of B33 there, but there's not a ton of it. And if we look at what happens versus the check, well, big blind isn't really able to do a ton either, right? There's a little bit more of the B75 because they are in position, but you can kind of see here that there isn't a lot of scope for them to really get super out of line, because these limped pots just don't excessively favor one player or the other. We're just seeing, moderate kind of aggression frequencies, fairly small bet sizings, and then a little kind of sprinkling of some bigger stuff, a little sprinkling of some boards that are a little bit better or a little bit worse. But really just a pretty moderate overall level of aggression from both players, because the SPR is high and the ranges are both relatively weak. So limp pots are going to very much kind of look like that. If we look at the 30 big blind limp pots, there's going to be some slight variation there. So if I go over to 30 big blinds and we go limp check, aggregate reports, there is some slight variation. There's going to be a little bit more of a shift towards the small blind having less of an orientation towards suited hands, and the big blind, let me just refresh because that queen 10 suited is still up there for some reason. There's going to be a bit more of a shift towards the small blind not having as many suited hands as the big blind does, because the big blind is primarily doing a certain amount of raising with a lot of their trashy offsuit stuff and then checking back a lot of suited hands. So you can see that a lot of the monotone boards are quite bad for the small blind here. But generally, similar sort of a thing. Small blind isn't able to be super aggressive here in a limped pot. The idea of just limping and then like betting one big blind on the flop at a high frequency here, not really going to be a big thing, not really going to be super successful against players that have the right kinds of ranges pre-flop. And the same thing is happening here for big blind. They're able to be a little bit more aggressive against this limp check range because they're in position, obviously, but not really going to be able to go too far. And as far as the sizings go, the B75 is only really used on a couple of these lower boards that tend to benefit the big blind a little bit more and allow for the big blind to have some amount of those offsuit two pairs that the small blind can never have here. So that's kind of contributing there. So we're generally seeing just overall limped pots not really featuring a ton of aggression. Now, if we look at 15 big blinds, I'm not sure if we have 15 big blind limp pots in the library. Limp check. Yeah, we don't have post flop for these 15 big blind limped pots, but very similar sort of a dynamic there. Not really going to see too much changing in those situations. But now let's look at the raised pots, right? Let's look at 60 big blinds, the small blind raises, and big blind calls. Aggregate reports here are going to produce some interesting stuff. We've got three sizes. We've got 25, we've got 50, and 133. Now, Nancy was asking about the role of each of these sizes, the purpose that each of the sizes is serving here. And it's kind of going to be a similar sort of framework to how it works in other situations, which is that the smaller bet sizing is generally going to be applicable in situations where the opposing range has a lot of very weak hands that are going to be forced to basically have a tough time defending against that small size. And the small size kind of forces them to defend more of those hands. It forces them to continue with a wide range despite the fact that they have a lot of bad hands. And that makes it very plausible for for ourselves to create very favorable future street situations based on that, because they're continuing with a range that's relatively weak and relatively capped. The bigger sizes are going to generally be reserved for situations where we have a specific region of value hands that we can have that they can't have. And that's going to just allow us to kind of leverage that nut advantage, leverage that strong range advantage through the later streets. So good example here of these big bets being used on certain board textures. It's a lot of these low card disconnected boards, which is very much the types of boards that these sizes get used on in single raise pots that aren't blind versus blind, right? And if you look at the types of textures, it's also not a coincidence here that these types of boards are boards where our overpairs are very, very strong. So we're able to take a hand like jacks, queens, kings, aces, and pile in a really big bet here to get max value and to get as many chips as possible in the pot right now before the board starts to get a bit worse for our hand and really put just a lot of hands in a tough spot here. This is the kind of the inverse scenario where with the smaller size, we're forcing them to defend a wider range. But in this case, we're actually forcing them to defend a very tight range. We're allowing ourselves to, basically force them to continue with at least, most of their top pair, probably all of their top pair and some of their other one pair hands here. They can only fold so much here. They can't fold like a ridiculous amount. And because of that, we're forcing them to kind of put tons of money in here with those one pair hands, which just basically puts our one pair, our strong one pair, in a really good spot. So we're not going to see the B133 on monotone boards because we don't want to shovel in money against a range that includes a bunch of flushes. But that's kind of the general gist of the structure here. If we look at what happens when we check, well, they don't really get to bet big very often, right? They don't really get to, big blind doesn't really get to use the B100 much here. They're just kind of restricted to a lot of smaller or more moderate sizes because they don't really have a lot of boards where they're going to have a really specific nut advantage versus our checking range. So there's not going to be a lot of situations where that makes sense for them, right? So that's the raise pots here. And a similar thing's going to happen at 30 bigs, except we're just not going to quite have such a significant scope for these really big bet sizes. I'm going to bring up the aggregate reports here. You can see that the 133 isn't part of the equation here, but there is a good amount of B75. And again, it's going to be board textures where we have the ability to basically just exert a significant range advantage here. And in this case, at this depth, it's going to be a lot of these triple Broadway boards because these are ones where the big blind is just not going to be able to defend very easily. It's also going to be a lot of these low card rainbow boards, maybe some of the paired tripled boards that have a lot of low cards on them. As you can see here, we're going to be able to apply some pressure there. So the 75 is going to be used in that context as well. Now, one thing I do also want to look at is some sizes in some limp-called pots, right? So we limp the small blind, big blind raises, and then we call, and then we go to a flop. Now, there is going to be a certain amount of some weird donk betting here that goes on in the small blind. I don't want to go too much into that just yet because donk betting is kind of its own whole thing. It is pretty tricky to figure out. Like there's some definitely pretty odd scenarios here. Like there's donking on ace king king. A lot of it has to do with the very specific aspects of the small blind's limp calling range and how they interact with board textures. So in practice, it's not going to be as useful because their range probably isn't going to be super accurate pre-flop. But let's take a look at what the big blind does after we get to the flop at this 9 SPR here in a limp-called pot, because this is going to definitely be a little bit different to a traditional single raise pot where you're playing in position and you're up against the big blind or something, right? The small blind's range here for limp calling is very different to what a normal big blind call range against an open would look like. And the big blind's range in particular is very, very differently constructed. We don't just have that sort of standardized kind of linear opening range. We're just opening, top 25% of hands or whatever percent of hands. We don't have that range anymore. We have this kind of crazy range where it's a lot more polarized pre-flop. So we have a lot of board textures where we don't really, like, we kind of interact in a polarized way with that board texture. We either flop really good hands or we flop really bad hands. So there's a lot less of this small bet with range kind of thing going on. In fact, if you look at the board textures in this formation, I don't think there's any board. There's literally, there's one board that's 99% frequency, but there's no board here that is range bet for a small size. And as far as boards that are range bet for, mix of sizes, there are a few of those, but there's not a ton. You can kind of see here, there's no monotone boards that are range bets here. There are some two-tone ones, but there's really only like 20 of them, possibly, something like that. We start to get some checking even once we get down to the 25th or 30th board here. So it's not going to be the case that it's easy for us to just blast off against this limp calling range, because this limp calling range interacts differently with flops, and because our range in particular is much less inclined to interact in a way where we just have a lot of medium to strong hands and we can just kind of push equity and have a range advantage here. We're going to have a lot of boards where we need to have quite a bit of checking, because they're pretty weak boards for us overall against the small blinds range. So if you look at the boards that are checking a lot here, there's a surprising amount of checking on boards that have a lot of Broadway cards. Ace, King 9, King Jack 9, King Queen 9. We're checking a lot on these boards. And this is because on these boards, we have a lot of hands that are completely missing these textures, right? If I open one of these up, let's open up Ace Jack 8 here. This is a good example. We've got a decent amount of big bets here. And we will see this as a pretty rare or pretty unique kind of a situation here. So we've got B100 with about a quarter of our range, and then we've got check with the rest of it, right? Take a look at how much trashy offsuit stuff we have in our range in this situation. Look at all of this, right? We've got 37% nothing here, right? And all of that is super weak. We've got stuff like queen high offsuit. We've got 10 high offsuit. We've got 7 deuce off in our range, right? We've got so many really, really weak hands in our range here that it's not viable for us to just range bet here. It's not viable for us to just bet small and force our opponent to defend at a high frequency. We actually have to kind of take a more polarized strategy. We are able to bluff with some of these very weak hands here, but we're not able to go overboard with them. We do have to kind of check and keep the pot smaller at some degree, or to some degree, with a lot of these hands. And then if we look at the other parts of our range here, we also have a lot of hands that don't really want to start growing the pot here, because of course we have a lot of ace X, but take a look at how much second pair and third pair we have. We have a jack, we have an 8 here quite a lot of the time, right? We have a lot of these hands. Jam on George. Yeah, wait, is that print jam on George? I don't know. I'm misinterpreting your emojis there. I might be too much of a boomer for those emojis. I'm not sure. But we've also got a lot of the king highs here as well, right? We've got all this king high stuff, 10% king high that is quite capable of checking back and still having the best hand, but also isn't going to function that well if we try to barrel off here with a big size. So we do have kind of a polar strategy here because of how much trash we have, right? Very interesting approach, very interesting strategy. Vote jam on George. Okay, I see. Nice. So as far as the overall strategy construction, we've got that B100 coming in sometimes. The boards where it's happening the most, you can see some of these triple broadways, but also some of these low card connected boards kind of serving to, again, allow us, our strong hands to get some money in on these boards, but also coping with that very polarized pre-flop range that we have here. So this definitely makes these spots pretty tricky. And at the 30 big blind depth, we're going to see probably a pretty similar dynamic. We're going to see limp call and then aggregate reports. There is a certain amount of donking again here at 30 bigs. We won't go in too much into that. We only have the B25 and the B50 now. We don't really need a huge size here, given that the SPR is only 3, just over 3. So we've got this B50 as the larger size, and if we look at where that happens, you can see there's a decent amount of boards that are going for it at some fairly high rate. A lot of the trips boards where the small blind basically doesn't really have trips very often, that's going to be a pretty decent texture for some of these bigger sizes. But you can also see some of the connected boards that are, in that region where there's a lot of gut shots and stuff out there. Perhaps our stronger hands are a bit more content to just get some chips in right away. And even a little bit of some monotone boards there, because small blind doesn't have as much of the suited stuff that is limp calling here, as they might in some other cases, right? So in general here, you can see that there's still a good amount of scope for big blind aggression, but still a pretty strong tendency to want to have at least a good amount of checkbacks on some of these boards that normally would be very good for the pre-flop raiser. And they are still good boards. If you look at the EVs, they're not too low down as far as EV goes, but they are going to be boards that do force us to do a lot more checking than we might expect because of how many trashy hands we have on these boards and the fact that we just can't realistically go overboard here too much. So that is, again, is an important dynamic there. So hopefully that addresses a couple of the issues there as far as the questions that Nancy was asking about the bet sizes. The sizes really here are just a kind of a product of how our range is constructed in these situations and how we are building our overall strategy when we have this, in the big blind at least, we have a pretty polarized pre-flop range that is going to have some weird decisions on some of those high card boards where we actually have a bunch of really trashy hands in there. So what I'll do now is I'm going to set up a trainer spot. Now, we've been going through some drills and some fundamentals so far this week on Discord. You guys who have been participating will obviously be very aware of what we've been doing. What I'm going to do is build just a basic complete hand drill, and I will make this drill available for you guys if you want it once I've built it. So we're going to go blind versus, blind fundamentals. So I'm going to create a general drill here. We are going to use some RNG, so I'm going to turn the RNG on. And we're going to go complete hand. We're going to go common spots. We're going to go 60 and 30. So we're just going to kind of, actually, you know what? No, I'm just going to go pretty much everything 25 plus, right? We're not going to go 20. Oh, you know what? I'm just going to go surprise me. I kept expanding like, oh, maybe I should include this. Maybe I should include that. But we're going to go play as small blind against big blind, right? And surprise me. So we're just going to start with blind versus blind fundamentals as small blind. And then we're going to go save and create new. And we're going to go blind versus blind fundamentals as big blind. And we're going to switch that over to playing as big blind against small blind. And in this case, annoyingly, we only have the ability to choose to face a raise. I don't think there's another way to do this. Play against small blind, play as big blind, facing raise. Yeah, so we're still kind of working on getting the small blind limp scenarios into the trainer. Not exactly sure why there, but that is something that we're kind of trying to fix at this point. The possibility to play, if we were to go pre-flop or post-flop specifically, we could select to play as both players. That would be certainly an option in these cases. But what I'm going to do is we're just going to actually start with the small blind drill that we just created there. So we're going to leave the big blind drill for now. We're going to go train, and we're going to start to work through. Could you manually edit a JSON file and trick it in there? Possibly. I don't actually know. I know nothing about JSON files or how to edit them. So if it's possible to trick it and edit it in there, you could possibly do that. I really don't know, but we are adding that in very soon. That is something that I raised to the dev team a little while back, so I would expect that to be included pretty shortly. I would imagine it won't take a long time. So our first spot, we have 8-6 offsuit, and I think what we want to take into account here is the RNG reads 42 first of all. So it is a spot where we're not going to be able to completely rule out raising or or anything like that just yet. But I do think that as far as this specific combo goes, the region or where our RNG would have to be in order to get us to raise it it's probably not going to be a high frequency raise. So I would think that it's just going to play call here. We're going to hit the call. We did make a good RNG play. Yeah, you can see it's low frequency raise, so our RNG would need to be at the higher end here, above 79, I think here. So we limp, we get a check, and we get a flop of ace-6-4. Now, I think this is a great example of a situation where a lot of players are going to be very inclined to look at this as, oh, it's ace high, at 25 bigs, like big blind probably doesn't have a lot of ace X, and therefore I can bet at a high frequency. But I'm not convinced that we're going to be that aggressive here, simply because the big blind is going to be checking back a lot of their suited aces pre-flop. And we're also going to be raising a lot of our strongest aces in one fashion or another here. So not 100% sure that we can really play this particularly aggressively, especially, some of those low card hands are going to interact with the 4 and the 6 here. I would say this hand probably has some frequency of betting here. And it wouldn't be that much, but we did roll an 86. So I think I'm going to bet with the 1 big blind size. Oh, RNG error. Okay, it might actually be pure check then. Let's see. Oh, wow. Okay, interesting. I did not expect a B75 here. All right. So, okay. So, I got kind of screwed by that one. Look at that. I rolled a what did I roll? An 80. I rolled an 86. But if I would have needed to roll a excuse me, a 64 or higher. So I guess it was still a reasonably big RNG error. Well, I thought I got screwed, but I didn't read it right. So yeah, looks like we actually go with a kind of a mix of the sizes there. Quite interesting to see that. But we do take the larger size line at a low frequency here. Now, once we get called and we get to this turn, I would expect this hand pure checks. I don't expect any need for a bet here. Let's see. Probably going to be a yes, because usually when it takes its time, it means we got it right. Okay, cool. Yeah, pure check. And then it goes check, check. We get a river 5. It would not shock me at all here if this hand is a decent candidate for the small bet. I think that the RNG is pretty low here, but I do feel like this is a decent spot to potentially get some value from a 4. A worse 6 even is still out there. And we also have a nice kind of interesting candidate that we could potentially like block and then 3-bet jam. So that might be a thing. Yeah, see now, oh yeah, this just feels like it just feels like a 3-bet jam spot right here for me. We got that straight blocker. We picked like almost pure block, and then yeah, I mean RNG is 77. Like I feel like we shove. Oh, RNG error. Okay, so shoving is definitely a thing here. But it is a bit of an RNG error. Let's see if we call. Ooh, okay. Now I really did get screwed. Okay, so it's a 19% shove. So if I had rolled an 82 or higher, wait, yeah, 80 above 81. If I had rolled above 81, then it would have been a shove. But I rolled 77. So, it's close. Not a substantial RNG error at all. Not really anything to particularly worry about. All right, we're going to hit the next hand. Jack 9 offsuit, again, 25 bigs. This one feels like very high frequency limp instead of raise. I think it would need to be a very high number for us to raise here. Oh, I guess not. All right, I guess we're raising then. Oh, man, it was right on the border again. Like, it's 54% call, 46% raise, and I rolled a 56. So I'm supposed to raise, but it's a 2% RNG error, so not really anything that we want to care about too much. Okay, moving on. King 8 offsuit. This time, this is interesting. We have 15 bigs. We opened a 2.8 and get 3-bet. This is just going to be pure fold. Queen 8 at 80 bigs. I think this is going to be pure call. We rolled pretty high, so oh, I guess not. We rolled 81. I don't think we're ever going to 3-bet here. I guess we just fold. Oh, wow. That's a higher frequency fold than I would have thought. Okay. So Queen 9 off is pure call. Queen 8 is actually right on the border at 80. Okay. That's 1 pip. I would have probably folded queen 7 off here. I think queen 8 is 1 pip tighter than I would have been here. Interesting. All right. I can get behind that. Jack 6 off. This one is likely going to be weak enough that it's probably mixing limp and fold. And I would think that limp is probably decently high. So let's say limp. Yep. Okay. It's actually, oh, it's pure limp. Okay. Yeah. Wow. All right. Okay. I didn't think we would, okay. Yeah. I thought we might be a little bit tighter with the folds. You're getting so many borderline decisions. Yeah. I mean, ultimately the whole thing of it here is that there are so many borderline decisions in these spots, right? That's kind of like why it's crucial to practice them. And as far as the RNG goes, I know it's frustrating sometimes when you're working with the RNG to kind of be dealt RNG errors all the time, but it is just useful to get a sense over time of where you're directionally going. And we're working on a lot of leak analytics tools that are going to really, I can't tell you enough, guys, how awesome it's going to be to have these tools be able to give you really, really clear insight into how accurate you are and how, are you too aggressive, too passive in certain spots. Like when we launch these leak analytics tools, it's going to be really, really cool. I'm very excited about it. Jack 6 off, we did limp, and I think we're going to be pure folding now. Okay, that's good. 4-3 off, I expect this to be pure limp, probably. Oh, mistake. Okay, fold. Oh, wow, pure fold. Okay. People defend it too tightly, it seems, in the blinds, or am I just misreading this so far? No, you're not wrong, Chad. People almost universally do defend too tightly in a lot of low-stakes environments. What you will find, though, is that they are probably a bit too unresponsive to stack sizes, which is to say that when they're deep stack, they're supposed to be defending tighter, and they don't really understand that. And then when they're short stack, they're supposed to be defending extremely wide, and they don't really understand that. So that's an important aspect here. And there's also some ICM aspects, like they actually can kind of they can kind of accidentally arrive at some good decisions in ICM situations where they're supposed to fold a bit more, but even though they're not really aware of ICM, they kind of manage to luck box themselves into a good ICM strategy. So people do generally defend too tightly, but that's partly just because people pretty much play too tightly across the board in a lot of circumstances. So yeah. Speaking of which, I was excessively wide in that spot, limping 4-3 off. Interesting. Ace 7 off. This feels like a jam. This feels like pure jam. Yeah, that's pure jam. Okay, nice. King Queen suited. We rolled a 29. This would probably be a high frequency raise, though. I feel like I still want to raise, even though we rolled 29. Yeah, okay, it's 99% raise. Okay, so we don't want to go too far. We don't want to, Chippy V versus ICM, but being blind to both and just feeling their way through. Yeah, I mean, that's a good way to look at it. They pretty much just have kind of a static approach of like, this is what I defend from the big blind in most cases, and they're not really adapting to the circumstances very much. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. So 10-5-5, I feel like there's a decent amount of 5x in the big blind range. I don't know if I love having a lot of c-bets here. This hand feels like probably checking quite a lot, but we did roll an 86. I'm gonna go big bet. Let's see. Oh, RNG error. Okay, maybe 2.25. Okay. Oh, interesting. All right. So did not expect to see. I went big bet and it gave me RNG error. That must mean there's like 1% of big bet or something in there. Anyway, we turn a spade, which is nice. This feels like probably very high frequency bet, but we rolled a 6. So we rolled extremely low. Now, I would suspect that probably means we check. Let's see. Yeah. Oh, okay. Actually, surprisingly low frequency bet there, only about 20%. We face a bet here. Oh, this just feels like such a good check shove spot. Kind of feel like we probably check shove. I don't love, well, maybe we check raise small, but I kind of don't love having like a like not actually having a combo draw here. We don't have like a straight draw of any kind, but we did roll a 93, so I'm just going to shove it. Ooh, 0.7% mistake. Okay, maybe we raise small. Okay, so yeah, that's it. So we do have some check shoves there, but not really with this hand. And the small raise is the better option, but it is a decent frequency raise there. River ace, we have two options. We have tiny weird block bet, and we have shove, and the shove is for like a third pot or like 35% pot. Two overs in a draw with a high RNG. Yeah, I mean, it's more about the fact that our strategy as a whole doesn't have a lot of shoving here. We prefer the small raise size, basically. Yeah, I think we're going to shove here. We rolled a 46, but... Oh, okay, no. Check, probably. Oh, man, they screwed me again. We rolled a 46. If we rolled a 53, we would have been shoving. Okay, so... Yeah, I think that's pretty close. Not really an RNG error that I'm concerned about specifically. Queen 5 off in the small blind at 30. I think this is going to be high frequency limp, possibly pure limp. RNG's at 78. Let's just call. Oh, God, man. Getting screwed here. Oh, okay. Oh, man. So it's 37% raise. Okay, so queen 4 off would have been pure limp, right? So I wasn't too far off. Queen 4 off is pure limp. Now we just fold. All right, let's do two more hands. Jack 4 suited. This is I think this is going to be very high frequency call, I think, but we did roll a 95. I think it's still going to be a call. Oh, no, okay, raise. Wow, we did, okay. Jack 4, yeah, okay, we did, we should have raised, okay. So a little bit too passive there from me. Jack deuce off. This does not feel like it's going to have any significant frequency of raising. We did only roll a 23, so we're going to call. And it goes check, check, and we're good. Okay, so it looks like that is a good spot to actually wrap it up for today. We're going to hit end on the session. I will post the drill for you guys in the Discord. So if you are in the Discord, go find it in the Coaching Streams channel. If you are not in the Discord, J4 was a raise, so Robbie Jade was right. Let's not get into that one. Let's not get into the Robbie Jade Lou fiasco. I will, yeah, like I say, I'll post the drill in the Discord. I will also see you guys in the Discord for any more questions that you might have or any more queries. Appreciate it. Hostito, thank you. Thank you guys for being here. Next week, I think next week we might try something a little different. I think we might do a user hand submissions review, something of that nature. I think that would be a good session to do. So we might shift this into that kind of a format. So I will post in the Discord for you guys about that. And again, if you're not on the Discord yet, you can find the link at the bottom of the Octopi homepage, right down here, this little Discord icon, if you want to get in there. So thank you, everybody. Appreciate you guys for being here. I'll be back same time again next week. And in the meantime, good luck to everybody. Hope you go out and crush it. And I will see you again very soon.